I'm Jamie, and I'm going to be talking about the country of the Philippines. And basically, I'm just going to be going over like the basic background, and then I'm just going to divide it into like the history of the Philippines and then the culture. So first, we should ask, where is the Philippines? And it's actually in the southeast part of Asia, and it's in the western Pacific Ocean, and it's made up of about 7,000 islands. And an article from National Geographic states that in 1996, the Philippines rests on the Pacific earthquake and volcano ring of fire. And this kind of has pros and cons from the consequences of that. The pros of this is, the pros of the location is the natural resources. The natural resources is kind of more of fruits like mangoes and coconuts instead of like diamonds or coal, and that's positive. There's also a large biodiversity in the Philippines, and in the pictures that I actually went there over the summer once, and there was like just goats just kind of walking around, and then there was actually in that picture right there of the man holding a snake, there's someone just found that in the house, and that's kind of just like a common thing. So you can really see that there's a big diversity in the animals there. And then the tropical climate. The climate there is very, very hot and humid. And the picture in the bottom right, it's just very tropical and just trees and just abundant beaches as well. And that kind of brings in tourists. Now the cons of the location, it's very drastic. There's a lot of natural disasters, and when you hear in the news, it's usually in the Philippines or in the islands part of the world. And it's usually really devastating to me personally because I have family there, so it's always like hard to hear that there's floods or there's very damaging side effects from it. They're mostly tsunamis and typhoons and occasionally earthquakes, and this brings about floods. And this also kind of aids in that it's a third world country, so it's very poverty stricken there. Next is the history. Next are two people that I want to talk about, and the first one is Imelda Marcos. And she was the wife of President Ferdinand Marcos, and in the Daily Mail article in 2012, it states that the two people, Imelda and Ferdinand Marcos, were kind of exiled from the Philippines because of a people riot, and they were evicted vastly, very quick. And they've actually found that she had about 1,000 to 3,000 pairs of shoes in the house. So this was really bad because since it's a very poverty-stricken country, her having all of those luxurious items is a very, very bad thing. And the second person I want to talk about is Manny Pacquiao. And he's a very famous world champion boxer. And in the picture there, it's just in Time magazine in 2009. And then in the picture on the other side of him, he's actually, at the age of 32, he was elected as the House of Representatives for the Philippines. So I thought that was interesting. The next important person I want to talk about is Ferdinand Magellan, and he was actually a Spanish explorer. And the Philippines was actually heavily Spanish influenced because it was kind of under Spanish colonization for about 300 years. So this very much influenced a lot of the culture in the Philippines. And for example, I have the Tagalog is actually the language of the Philippines. There are many dialects of the Philippines, but Tagalog and English is one of the main languages. And an example of words that Spanish and Tagalog that I have is Dios, which is God, Mundos, which is world, and Puede, which is can. And there's a whole list of these words that are very similar to Spanish. Another example that I have is food, and there's a lot of foods like empanadas and afritas, which is very Spanish influenced. And the name of the Philippines was actually from King Philip II of Spain. So the next topic I want to talk about is my favorite, which is food. And the history of food in the Philippines is kind of the melting pot of Asia. That's what they kind of say about it. And the pictures that I have of there is palabok, which is a noodle dish with a bunch of vegetables and seafood. And the next one that I have is bibingka, which is kind of more in the Christmas time, and it's kind of coconut and rice cake. And next is, for Filipino gatherings, it's kind of like a potluck type of deal, and everyone just brings their own thing. And if you go to any Filipino parties, the main thing is the food there. And written in an article in 2001 in USA Today, it says Filipino families place a high premium on meals, considering them as an important time to socialize with friends and family. And I can really attest to that because it's really the main part of the party. And for the fast food I have up there is Jollibee. This is kind of comparable to McDonald's, but they actually serve like hamburgers, fries, but they also serve fried chicken and spaghetti. Lastly, an important part of Filipino culture is the transportation. And in the picture on the top, it's called a jeepney, and there's a lot of variations of these. It's very colorful, and it kind of looks like graffiti, but it's actually like art, and it's the most popular means for transportation. And actually, a story that my dad told me when he was younger, he would ride on the back of the jeepney. As you can see, some of the people are riding on the top, and that's kind of just like a normal thing for them, I guess. And the second type of transportation is tricycles. And this is similar to like taxis, kind of, because they're just always asking pedestrians if they need a ride somewhere. And this is just a quick and easy, cheap way of transportation around the Philippines. And it's typically either on motorbikes or just pedaling like a bicycle. And lastly, a lot of the events that happen in history, like the Spanish colonization, heavily influenced the Philippines. And it kind of gives it the culture that it has today, very diverse and interesting.